Hi class, thank you for joining me today asynchronously. I have a bit of a sore throat, so I'll try my best to complete this video lecture. And so I'll demonstrate for you what we'll be doing in class today. So we'll be working exclusively online asynchronously. If my throat were feeling better, I would hold a Zoom class instead, but I have a headache and my throat hurts. I should get my test results back by tomorrow, I believe, and so then I'll let you know if we're able to meet in person on Thursday or not. I may not even be able to meet because maybe I'm sick for a different reason. So we can continue class in this way until I'm better and I have the clearance to be back on campus. So let me first go through the discussion questions, just briefly highlighting some talking points. So good job for those who've already posted. And the discussion questions are kind of function like annotations of the article. They become really useful later on when you're asked to do your own writing projects and needing to reference any of these older articles. So you can always go back to these discussion posts so that way you can review the articles, especially in a few weeks from now if you forget what some of these articles are about. So let's kind of treat them in that way. And of course, then we meet in class so that way we can engage with some of the concepts and theories as a group. So I'll just briefly review some of the highlights from you guys' posts, and then afterwards talk about what I had planned for today and what you can complete online for today's class. So the first question you guys answered about what it means for someone not to know how to use a computer or laptop or be able to compose in Word or Google Docs. And what's interesting is how intertwined our values about literacy and our values of what it means to be a college student, what it means to be an educated person, how they're intertwined with our digital skills, our technological skills. And so our first assumption is someone did not use a computer or use some of the software, when it's like, what's wrong? Like, what happened, right? So we have to raise the question, can this particular person do all the kinds of intellectual work that you can do on a computer and as well as on paper? Like, can they do the same intellectual work? And we think about ability and accessibility, and we think about many millions who have no choice but to do this type of work, perhaps outside of a computer, maybe only using books and paper, and who become professors and doctors and scientists and so forth. But we have sort of as a barrier to particular industries is a certain knowledge of technology and a certain knowledge of digital literacy skills that are necessary in order to acquire social mobility, to acquire a certain degree of wealth in this country. So there's often an assumption like, what is wrong with that person, right? So we sort of appropriate this deficit model. So just kind of want everyone to kind of be mindful of that, like, yeah, that's kind of like, in terms of all the answers, that's their first assumption, is there's something missing in this person. And this is often what has happened with each new technology that has been introduced to society. A certain set of values are associated with the use of those particular technologies. The next one is about the 5 key themes. So each of you were selecting one of them and what they meant to you. So you can go through and look through some of these. And let's see, other ones I want to highlight. On the significance of featuring 2 women in this article. Some of you talked about the fact that historically women have not been given access to particular technologies. You sort of, and also the technology industry. So you sort of look at the origins of Silicon Valley and the development of Google and Facebook and all of these different technology companies, and very few women were part of the creation or development of these major companies and the major programs and software and hardware that were created. And you also look at video games and that culture. and women do participate and play games and so forth, but they're very much underrepresented. In history, they were very much underrepresented, but you see some things changing there, even though it's still dominated by males. And we still see in STEM, with engineering and science and technology and mathematics, still being dominated by men. And so the fact that we are learning about the narratives of two women, especially a black woman, is something that was important for the authors to emphasize in telling these stories, because we have to ask, when we are telling stories, which stories are we excluding by default? What else? Talked about the significance of the I Have a Dream speech. So many of you talked about how with that speech it sort of shifted for Melissa's family, like what was going on in the larger social political context that she might not have known otherwise. And so that changed some of the decisions that she made in terms of where she put her kids in school and the kinds of education that she wanted to provide for them. And so we see occurring with technologies like television, for instance, and parents and families making different decisions in their personal lives. So one of the central arguments of the article is that technology development does not happen in a vacuum, that it is happening within these larger social, political, historical contexts, various events that are happening around us. And I've talked about before about in 1957 when Russia was the first to send a satellite into outer space. That freaked out the United States, and they just felt that we should have gotten there first, and they sort of assigned public education sort of the responsibility to get kids caught up with countries like Russia. And so there was more emphasis in mathematics, but also in writing as well, as a result to the Sputnik launch in 1957. So we see throughout history all these instances where media images and the role of media, now social media, impacting what is being taught in the classroom, impacting what we should value as readers and writers. Ever since the 2016 election, there's all of this emphasis now on identifying fake news, and we see a shift in the classroom, more attention to anti-racism pedagogy, for instance, and providing students the critical thinking skills and resources to be better citizens for Black Americans, for Asian Americans, for trans Americans, for women, for Latinos, and so forth. So we see this influence coming from our politics and coming from all different arenas. Then you go back up here and talked about the factors that influence our literacy. And as I was mentioning, it comes from our larger social political landscapes, but also from our family. And in the case, for instance, of Brittany being raised in the 80s and 90s, he has now friends who have come from families that have access to computers. And so you see literacy being valued and changing, not only in her own home, but we see it changing in her communities as well. And so the more people in a particular community have access to computers or certain kind of technological resources, the more that you're going to sort of have access to that information, the more that friends of friends are going to be teaching each other and innovating, creating, and so forth. So it creates this ecology, this culture, this ecology of technology and literacy, where we see all these different connections between different industries at a personal level and professional level, where technology is part of the material landscape, but also part of the symbolic landscape. It's changing the way we speak. It's changing what we value and learn and what it means to be literate today. And let me move on. All right, so let me move on. Definitely, if you are behind and you haven't read the chapter, definitely take the time to do so and provide your posts, but you can also read through already people's answers. It helps you kind of orient yourself to the article as well. And okay, so let me go ahead and move on to the next thing, and that is to write your digital literacy narratives. So hopefully we will get together in class on Thursday so we can share our narratives out loud. So if not, we will have to wait to share these until I have the green pass to come to class. And let me move on. If you haven't completed your narrative yet, please take the time to do so. And for today's class, what I would like for you to do is to participate in this lesson on social history of media and technology in schooling. Really, my throat's getting sore. Let me just take a sip. 1 second. And we'll see how much longer I can talk for you guys. Okay, so at the very beginning, I would like for you guys to do is to define these terms by adding a comment. So what is writing technology? So highlight the term and go to insert a comment and hit insert and then comment, and then you can leave your comment answering. Someone already started it, then you can go ahead and just reply to that comment so you don't have like 50 comments on a single slide. So then define what is literacy in your own words. If you need to Google it, by all means you can do so, but ideally I'm interested in what you understand that to mean right now. So again, insert comment and then answer. If somebody already started before you, then just reply to their comment to answer it. And if there's anything about someone's response that maybe you want them to clarify, you can always obviously reply and actually have that person answer your question. So this is intended to be interactive. So I get an email notifying, being notified that I received comments from you, and then you get an email and being notified that somebody replied to you. So respond when you receive a question. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the role of particular media like the telephone, TV, and books, and the role that they played in schooling in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. And so in the late 19th century, you need to remember that you had this influx of immigrant children coming to school. So grade school teachers at the time felt it was their moral duty to teach these kids to read and write and know biblical literature and biblical doctrine. And so to be a moral, outstanding citizen in their community, they needed to be able to do these different literacy activities. And so what was common at the time was reading out loud, but that shifted once books became, books like the Dick and Jane series in the 1930s became more ubiquitous. And so what ended up happening was this culture of silent reading. So we saw this literacy activity where reading meant someone reading out loud, much in the way we see in some churches where you have a priest or some representative reading the Bible text out loud, where you now have books in kids' hands and they are engaging in silent reading. And so there's a major shift in literacy activity due to the popularity of books like the Dick and Jane series. So here's an example of this. You may have seen this before, perhaps in memes. I remember as a kid having read a book like this. And so in some major communication technologies that were invented, introduced into society, included technologies like photography in 1835, telegraph in 1844, telephone in 1876. You had the radio becoming more popular in 1920s. And then this was interesting because you would have news broadcast, but you would also have books read over the radio. You would have certain plays read over the radio. So that was one particular literacy activity that happened through that medium. You had also black and white television, 1936 to 1967, and then you had the electronic computer. So this was introduced in 1946, and we're talking about computers like the size of rooms. So this is not in any way a personal computer. So the first question I would like for you guys to answer is, why would an invention like photography or graphic design, for example, change how we learn in school? So why would a technology like photography or something like you can use to create particular designs, like some kind of computer software, for instance, why would that change how we go about learning in school? So go ahead and highlight any letter here and leave a comment there. And so I want to give an example of that. And how is COVID contracted? And so you can read this particular description here. I will save you from reading it out loud because my throat is hurting me. And we have here kind of a textbook definition of how it's contracted. And so after reading this paragraph, can you say, okay, now I get it. Now I understand understand how COVID works. I know how it's contracted. And so then we have something here, like in terms of graphic design, we have literally the same thing being described, how a virus works. And we have here this illustration sort of explaining in detail how a particular virus function. And so we have the step-by-step directions. So how does this impact learning? So what is gained by having the visual model here, but also what is lost, okay? Especially when we compare it to something like a paragraph, and treating the paragraph as a type of technology, which didn't come about until you saw the books and that technology being developed. And so then you have our next question. If visuals and video content do a better job at teaching a concept, why not just have students learn to read and write by watching YouTube videos, masterclass, or movies like Dead Poets Society? Why not just play, for instance, Dead Poets Society and call that an English literature education and call that a liberal arts education? Why not just take master classes? If you're not familiar with that, you can Google this term. There's these courses you can take with famous writers and innovators, filmmakers, and every expert you can think of in every industry. So again, highlight any word and go ahead and insert and then leave a comment. And next, so we have here something like photography, and we can start to imagine now what particular types of activities that have occurred worldwide that historically we have not had access to. I'll never know what a war looks like, but I can have a video clip that demonstrates that. I will never know how a carpiño, I think they're called carpiño or carpincho, just discovered like a new animal in Argentina, and it is like the ugliest thing I've ever seen. And they are pets for some people. And I can now go on YouTube and I can see how they walk. I can like look up how they sound and so forth. And then I can think about the authentic character of a particular politician. And so one thing that was influential in John F. Kennedy Jr.'s election was that people got to hear and see. They got to see how handsome he was, how charismatic he was, and they felt that he was just more authentic, that he had a stronger character than his opponent, Nixon, at the time. Okay, so it's your turn. So talk about a time when your mind was changed because you saw a video or photo of something. Alright, so let's move on to the next slide. So in the 1920s and 30s, it was a top-down approach from politicians and technicians to integrate film and radio into the classroom as a way to celebrate these U.S. inventions. So the focus was less on student learning, and it was more about advancing these technologies. Many can argue that it was a way to turn students into consumers of these technologies, which is one rationale for Mac providing computers to students in the 90s, for instance, and 2000s, and making it accessible and affordable to students, was one way of creating a generation of Apple consumers and to consume Apple content. And some would argue that Apple was quite successful at doing that. And so teachers did not view these technologies as sort of helpful to teaching students how to think critically. In fact, they believed that it turned them into passive consumers of information and content. After World War II, you saw some of the technologies that were used during the war being introduced into the classrooms. And so what you saw were these giant machines. Teachers called them furniture movers, or furniture pieces as well. And they were called subject matter trainers. And basically, they were just multiple choice tests, multiple choice machines. And so it's like, yes, you got it correct, or no, you didn't get it correct. And so it was kind of like a punch card technology. And so they would use this to teach writing. And so they would teach spelling and second language skills this way. So my question for you guys, again, you can highlight any part of the slide here. What is problematic about teaching writing in this way, as a yes, you got it correct, or no, you didn't get it correct? What's so problematic about that approach? And then you saw in the 50s and 60s with the popularity of television. And like any new technology, at first it's very, very expensive. Very few people can afford it. And then it becomes mass-produced, and it becomes more affordable and accessible to everybody. So in the beginning, when there was very little educational programming created on television, but the programming that was created for education came in the form of musical recitals, short talks, or recitations or skits. So that's kind of what you would see. But just like in with the use of the radio in the classroom, teachers question the use of TV, and arguing that it didn't replace the kind of face-to-face interactions that were needed whenever students had questions, for instance. It's the shortcoming, for instance, of this very lecture, and the fact that you couldn't offer follow-up questions or disagree with anything or add your own 2 cents. But the next best thing is for you guys to add comments onto this slide, and then I can reply directly to your comments. And then, as I mentioned before, Sputnik in 1957, the United States were freaking out that our children were falling behind, and we needed to create the new generation of scientists. And so you have developed during this era, ENIAC was the computer that was used to crack the German codes during World War II. And that technology influenced the modern computers that we have today, which, as we've learned, were used predominantly for accounting or surveillance and monitoring, as well as just detecting errors. Yes, this is correct, or no, this is incorrect. And then we have what we see today with computer chips. So the development of microprocessors led to desktop computers, laptops, smartphones, Apple Watches, word processing software, audio recorders, video recorders. So in each of these instances, we have a new set of literacy skills being developed, where we're able to, even with an Apple Watch, I can create video memos, audio memos, and so I can annotate with my Apple Watch. I can take notes, I can create content, and then use that later to transcribe and write my next novel if I wanted to. And so we see these microchips, these microprocessors in everything we use today, and completely changing and shifting our literacy landscape. So my question for you guys is, what digital literacy knowledge do we need to know today? And so highlight any one of these question marks and add a comment. What do we need to know today? What do we need to know to be able to compose and read on the web? What do we need to know to be able to use social media? What skills, what values do we need in 2021? So let me see here. And this was if we were to meet today, but we will hold off on that. And this is about reading the digital literacy narratives, which we hopefully will be able to do on Thursday. And yeah, so this is something we can leave for Thursday. Okay, so we'll end class here. And if you have any questions, I have these questions down here. You're more than welcome to check out to help you answer this final question. And let me come back to your guys' course. And after that, the reading presentations. So for Thursday's class, we have 2 reading groups, and directions are here in terms of what to do for your mini reading presentation. You have Why Technology Matters and the Banks article. You can find both of these articles at the beginning of the module. You come back here and you can find these 2 articles here. Okay, so you're assigned to one of the 2, and you will summarize and note key concepts, define key terms, and so forth. So you'll be responsible for basically educating the other half of the class that is not assigned to read it. So it's kind of like splitting the homework, basically. Instead of everybody reading 2 articles, you read one and educating the second half of the class about the other one. Okay, I will stop talking because my throat hurts a lot right now. I hope to see you guys on Thursday. Take good care.